You're listening to the Guitar Heroes podcast.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to episode 11 of the Guitar Heroes podcast. My name is Lee, and I'm joined tonight by Mr. Phil Walker.
Reluctantly.
Reluctantly?
Yeah, sorry, guys. Yeah, reluctantly.
Explain
I'm reluctantly
yourself.
here today. Yeah.
Why?
Well, do you want to? Oh, do you know what? I'm just going to get it over with. Cue the music.
Phil's Rant.
Yeah, I'm reluctantly here, guys, tonight because it's Tuesday night. It's quite a special time of year for me, and I'm here doing a podcast when I should be watching Chris Packham's Winter Watch. I'm not. I'm here talking about stupid guitars and stupid amplifiers and things like that when I should be watching beavers and badgers.
I don't know what to say to that, other than,
I'm
dear.
speechless.
And now I'm going to have to watch it on BBC Catch-Up, and it was not the same. It's not the same as watching it live.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you, as always. Thanks for showing up. And,
yeah, whatever. Who else is here?
And I'm also joined by Mr. Chris Taylor.
That's how I feel.
It sounds like we're in for quite a rough ride tonight with Phil, so let's be kind to him. That's got to be a Guitar Heroes record for the earliest Phil's rant ever.
But that's
in
it.
a
It's
podcast.
over with. It's only short, and it's like well, it's me, isn't it? Short and over with quickly.
Phil, I think you could run with a spin-off, I think.
Phil Walker
Yeah.
podcast coming soon. It's just you
Short and
ranting
quick.
about just ranting about woodland creatures and
I might start a new series of one-word podcast. You know, like that's some really nice music that comes in. And welcome to tonight's podcast. Bored.
Phil Walker's Guide to the English Dictionary. Just a
Yeah.
different word every week.
Booze. Go on.
Anyway, moving on. So, theme for this evening. Cast your minds back a few weeks, a month or so now. We did a Desert Island Discs episode where we took a close look at some 50s music. We thought we'd return to that theme tonight because it seemed to go down quite well, and we thought we would tackle the 1960s. So, we are the Castaways, and we've hopefully come prepared this evening with a few choices of some 60s guitar music that was both significant to us but also significant to the development of the guitar in the wider sense, and a little bit of background on the 1960s. And boy, what a decade. What a decade. I have been well and truly down the rabbit hole on this one.
Speaking of rabbits. Speaking of rabbits, I'm missing watching a rabbit burrow tonight.
You ruined my intro then. I was in
It'll be
a
a
flow.
long podcast.
I was in the flow then.
Go on. Yeah, flow.
So yeah, we're the Castaways, and we've had to pick a couple of tracks that hopefully it'd be interesting to see, as with the 1950s episode, if any of us have doubled up on anything, because you know we do have a lot of crossover tastes when it comes to guitar music, and also we all play in the same show, which maybe we're going to cover some of those artists tonight. But yeah, the first things first before we get into the music. What a decade! I was just on Wikipedia for 3 hours this afternoon, just delving into everything that happened in the 60s, and man, what a time to be alive. So on that note, Phil, how was it?
Yeah, it was great. Well, they didn't call it the swinging 60s for nothing, I tell you what. Yeah. Are you on about the 1860s or the 1960s? Because both were wicked, let me tell you.
Let me just, I've made some notes. I've come prepared tonight. So the 60s, this was the decade that gave us obviously the rise of John F. Kennedy and also the demise of John F. Kennedy. Interestingly, there was a divide between the 60s as a chronological decade and the 60s as in the movement, the 60s. And most websites that I sort of came across today seem to indicate that the 60s, the idea of the swinging 60s and free love and all that, actually kind of started after the assassination of JFK, which I thought was an interesting point, because here you had obviously a pioneering leader and someone who was pushing a lot of new radical ideas, and the world was moving out of the times of war, and we were all hoping for peace. And then the tragedy in Dallas, Texas occurred, and I think it made people look at life a little bit differently. So in the 60s, you've got things happening such as the Vietnam War. You've got, again, the rise of Martin Luther King, speaking out for black rights, and then also sadly being assassinated. You've got the Cuban Missile Crisis in '62. You've got Civil Rights Act of '64, which outlawed racial segregation in America. You've got the Berlin Wall going up. You've got feminist movements, gay rights movements. You've got all this happening. You've got the space race, the US against the Soviet Union, ending in the moon landing, whether you believe in that or not, in '69. I just think, man.
So much of society does affect the way music moves as well. It has music has the potential to change a mood and encourage a different behavior, and really has the power to culturally and emotionally influence our society. And as time progresses, we see a difference in the way music is made as well. And obviously, we saw that hugely with the British invasion heading over to the States.
Yeah. Well, that was kind of where I was coming. I was looking at the background, the context for all of this, because obviously, when you get an idea of what's going on in the world, you can maybe understand the music a little bit more. So, after the 50s, the world had largely recovered in an economic sense from World War II. Europe had kind of rebuilt itself, and they had a massive economic boom, and there was the rise of the middle classes, and people were suddenly able to afford modern technology like TVs and instruments and things like that. But over in the States, you had what was known as the death of rock and roll. So, as in the song American Pie, the day the music died, the end of the 1950s, and their music scene changed quite significantly. They left behind the days of Chuck Berry and Little Richard and Jerry Lee Lewis and all that, and they moved into kind of a more, safe, poppy, nice culture for a while. And it was actually, as far as I can tell, up to us Brits to bring it back with the British invasion. And man, were we involved. That was a good time to be British, that sort of 63, 64 period onwards. You look at all of the big names in that period, and it's like, whew, we were on a roll. We were on a roll.
And not only that, the Vox AC30. How British is that?
Yes.
I had to get that in. That's the best thing to come out of the 60s, the Vox AC30.
Yeah, it's appeared on most, if not all records, isn't it? Either that or a Fender amp or something. But yeah, the Vox AC30 was the sound of the 60s, in my opinion. And used to have one, Phil. I've never owned one myself.
Yeah, I've had one. Yeah.
Have you ever had an original, or has it just been like a reissue model?
No, I had what do they call it? CC2? Is that what they are? CC.
Yep.
We should know that.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yep.
Yeah,
That's right. Yeah.
The Vox CC2. It was okay. It was all right. It wasn't really an AC30, to be honest. It was okay. It was as heavy as an AC30, but it wasn't like. And I've played through a couple of original ones, and it's a completely different animal. But I know somebody who has got 2 or 3 original 60s AC30s and still gigs them. So that's cool.
I was fortunate enough to be loaned, I think it's a 65 AC30 that my uncle has had for many years, and he let me look after it for a while he was moving around the country.
Wow.
And yeah, man, what an amp. I remember the smell of it almost as much as anything else. It just, you clunk, turned it on. Have you seen that video of Brian May? He did like a tuition video back in the day.
I used to have it. Starlex, yeah.
That's the one, yeah. And he has to turn his amp on and off every time he wants to play a lick because it's so noisy. It goes clunk.
Yeah.
I remember this AC30 making that noise and the smell. But one day it picked up Spanish radio. I was sat playing away, noodling away, and then over the crackle of it, you sort of just got these wafts of some sort of Spanish radio station. It was quite weird.
2 or 3 years ago, I was up at Yamaha headquarters, and Martin Adam, he's a great guy, and he collects a lot of vintage amps. And we were in the guitar workshop one day, just chatting away, and I got talking about AC30s, and he just disappeared. And then he came back with wheeling this trolley, and on it was an original 60s. I think it was a copper top AC30.
Wow.
And I went, what? Where have you been? He's got Marshall plexes and all sorts in there, and we plugged this AC30 in, and oh my God, my hair fell off. It was amazing. It was just an amazing experience, you never get that. I mean, on records you'll hear an AC30, but unless you're in the same room as an original AC30, you're right, Lee, the smell, the crackles, in fact, he said to me, it fired up, warmed up for a little while, fired it up, and started playing through. And he said, "Oh, it must like you." He says, "It doesn't always work first time."
Well, yeah, that's another true fact about them. I think at any amp of that age, they're temperamental at best. But man, those AC30s, like Brian May has said many times, they distort in a very unique way that is very pleasant. A lot of amps of that time, if you think you're coming out of like the Tweeds, the Tweed Fenders into the Blackface Fenders, they had a different type of distortion. But the AC30s, when you wound them up, they went from a really nice clean to a very smooth, very rich distortion, and yeah, killer amps.
And a little story about that. My dad used to have an AC30, and he was playing in what do you call it? Like a town hall back then, where they had big dancers, And to get the Kinks sound, you really got me that type sound. Everybody wanted to get that and couldn't. And the speakers blew in his AC30 one night, and he got that sound, and he was like, "Whoa, that's it."
Well, interesting point, actually. If I just check my notes here, interesting point about that song, "You Really Got Me." That tone that Dave Davis got on that was, it wasn't a Vox. It was some, I forget the brand of the amp, but essentially he did take a penknife to it, and actually literally slice the cone, and that's where he got the distortion from, because that was 1964. You Really Got Me, and it was one of the earliest examples of that, a proper distortion sound, and it was just him. I think he said he just got frustrated with the amp one day. I think I read that in an interview, and just literally stabbed it and went, "Hang about, what have I landed on here?"
He could afford to experiment, though. My dad was really upset.
So yeah, the aforementioned British invasion, sort of 63, 64. Interesting to note when I was reading into that as well. So you've got the rise of Beatlemania, and obviously the Beatles just exploding all around the world and taking everything that is British and everything that's rock and roll right back into people's lives. An interesting point that I found online, I didn't know this, was literally a month or two after the Beatles exploded, Chuck Berry was released from jail. He'd done it. I don't know what he was in for, but he'd been inside for 2.5 years, and it was almost like he was in jail, locked away, whilst rock and roll has supposedly died, and there was lots of pop and surf music and stuff happening. And then Beatles explode, rock and roll's back, and they let Chuck out.
I think we know why he was in. I think we do know why he was in jail, but we should probably not mention it on this podcast.
I don't like to look too deep into that side of him because it ruins it. Anyway, so there we go. That is the 60s, culminating in, obviously, Woodstock, 1969, landing on the moon. Man, what a decade to be alive. But let's get on to the music. So who wants to go first?
Shall I?
I've said enough, so
go
someone
on, Phil.
else.
You go.
Okay, I'm gonna go first because I really want to get this guy out and this band before anybody else does.
Okay.
And you can probably see from the colour of my guitar who it's going to be.
What is that, pink, Phil? I have no idea.
Yeah, it's a Hello Kitty guitar. Do you like it?
Oh, where'd you get that? Argos.
Yes, yeah. Click and collect. Amazing. My greatest guitar hero of all time, without a doubt, the reason I play guitar, Mr. Hank B. Marvin from the Shadows. Yeah. I mean,
Nice.
that guy changed music. He changed the sound of the guitar. He had the first Fender Stratocaster ever to be brought into this country. It was Cliff Richard that imported the Fender Strat. It was they were listening to James Burton, and they thought, "Oh, let's get the top of the range. That's surely what he must be playing." He was playing a Telecaster. They ordered a Strat, thinking he would have been playing that. So this Fender Stratocaster arrived, and all the early Shadows and early Cliff and Shadows songs, all the solos and everything was all played on the very first guitar to hit the English shores. So that's cool, isn't it?
It's amazing.
Amazing.
Yeah, and he's innovative for the time. I mean, his use of echo and everything, and the whammy bar, the tremolo arm, and apparently the strings were so heavy on the guitars back then that to get the vibrato, he developed this style with the tremolo arm, so it was nigh on impossible to bend strings.
Wow.
On the guitar that came through, and that's how he developed the style. And the echo as well, and actually I've got something set up here on my guitar. I'm using the HX Stomp with some nice modelled echo units on there. But he started out using the Miazzi, and then I think he went on to the Binson Echarec, which I used to have a Binson Echarec too. It's worth a fortune now. Honestly, it's such a great thing. And then he went on to the Roland RE301, I think, through the 70s and 80s, and I think he now uses what they call echoes of the past. Somebody went and sampled all the echo sounds, so it's digital but analog, if you know what I mean.
I used to have I forget the name of the pedal, but I used to have a real hardcore group of Shadows customers, because Hank he's one of those players that particularly guys of a certain age seem to really just I can understand, because he well no actually if I'm honest, older than you, Phil, because I guess they really grew up with him and he was that icon. There wasn't many guitar icons around. I mean, Apache was 1960, so not many guitar icons to choose from at that time. But I had a few customers that came in with a delay pedal that was essentially like a Shadows delay pedal, pre-programmed with all the songs, so you could literally just select, Apache, Foot Tapper, whatever it was, and it would just all be preloaded for you. That was pretty cool.
Yeah, they did it in Digitech pedals, and they did it in the Alesis Quad Reverb. And I think they do it in different ones now, but they call it Echoes from the Past, I think it was. And but anyway, I've programmed this into my HX Stomp. And sort of the difference in echoes that the Shadows did use, which helped along with the sound. So I'll just play some couple of. So it gets quite. I'd say lost, the echo. You don't really know what the echo is. You know there's some in there, but when you play like something like this.
Yeah.
You can really hear what's going on, like a multi-head thing going on. And then for Apache, they've got this really out-of-time multi-head type echo, which if I just play... And then if you do the gallop of Apache, it really comes into its own.
Cool. Yeah.
That sounds great. And that's one of the great things about the Stomp, isn't it? It's so flexible, and you can. I think it's part of the fun. Rather than I'm the sort of guy who'd rather try and fiddle around with effects and try and get close to it myself, rather than have it preloaded for me. I think it's part of the fun, isn't it? And I think the Stomp offers that is so good. And does it give you all the delays and reverbs that you need to create those sounds, Phil?
Yeah,
Would you say?
I mean, originally, I used the HD 500 in the guitar show, HD 500X, and I can't remember what they were called in there, but when we went to the Helix, it was a completely different platform, so I had to start looking at, rebuilding all the delays again, all the sounds again. And when I found a couple of tube delays, and what I did is I put two together, and then I was like, yeah, that's okay, that's all right, that works. And then I found the which I forgot. It's a multi-head anyway. I'll have a look in a second. It's a multi-head, and that way you can have. I think it's got 4 heads in there, and you can decide which heads you want on. There's the wow, the flutter, everything that you sort of get on these old machines. It'd be really interesting to hear them side by side, actually. Because I listen to this and I think, wow, that sounds really cool. That's pretty darn accurate in my ears. Maybe obviously you've got a Binson Echarec there. You're going to get also. That's quiet, but a Binson Echarec, I know you've had when you got the disc spinning round, and the same with the the Roland Space Echoes. You can hear the join in the tapes, not on the Echo that was a disc, but the tape goes across the heads. It goes, the join in the tape as the tape gets older, and you get all that, which you don't get with the digital stuff.
What was it called? The Catlin Bread Echo Rec was always a really good replication of the Binson, and I've got the Strymon El Capistan on my board, and that tape echo thing that I guess really started with Hank is just epic and was used obviously by so many people after. But I've been listening to loads of Shadows recently, actually, on my record player, which is just awesome, and exactly like you demonstrated, Phil. I love the way that in so many of their songs he'll play the main melody or whatever it is in a more fluid kind of style, and then there'll be a B melody or the same melody again, but he plays it in that muted style, so you get the real echo that jumps out at you there, and you get the ping pong type. So cool, especially when you think that was 60 years ago they were doing that. It's it's crazy.
I mean, back in 1960 when they did Apache, I mean, it was, I think it was number one, wasn't it? It was an amazing piece of music. I mean, now it sounds really tame, and young people of today would be like, you think you've lost your mind listening to that sort of stuff. But back then, it was like so advanced,
Wasn't there some controversy as well that they actually knocked Cliff off the number one spot? Because they were the backup band, and then they sort of went their own way. Cliff was aware that they were doing that, and then there was a time where they both put out records, and the Shadows actually, pipped him to number one, which must have been interesting. But,
well, there's actually a good little documentary on. I think it's still on iPlayer, or it's certainly on YouTube, and it's I think it's the Shadows at 60, and it's I think it's about an hour long, and there's Cliff talking on there, and they were all saying that they wanted the Shadows to do well. There was none of this. Oh, my backing band have left. There's none of that type of thing. They were all in the same camp. They were all fighting from the same corner. And there was none of this falling out or anything like that. It was all done in good spirits and for the good of music.
Well, it's a fun bit that we get to do in the show every night. So when we can get back to gigging, definitely come out and see us. And check out the Shadows part, because it's good fun.
Especially the choreography.
I was going to say there may or may not be some Shadows footwork involved as well.
Oh, there will. Don't worry about that.
Lovely. All right. Well, nomination then for. Was there a particular song that you want to nominate, or is it just Hank and the Shadows?
Well, there's lots of Shadows songs that I really like. I don't have a particular. Wonderful Land, I think, is one of my favourites. It has to be the one that I played first, demoed first. Then, Wonderful Land, I think, was probably one of the first Shadow songs I learned to play, and certainly when I was probably about 12, 13 years old, my mum and dad bought me a Watkins Copycat.
Nice.
And getting the Shadow sound on that, and so it was probably Wonderful Land. Then my favourite, I will say. Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Love it. Right. Hank Marvin.
That's a great nomination.
He's in. Chris, I'm looking at you. What have you got for us?
Okay, well, gentlemen, I'm going to take you back to 1964, December the 21st, with the song My Girl by The Temptations.
Nice.
Okay,
didn't see that one coming.
Oh, really? Okay. Well, for me, I've always loved this song, and obviously it has that particular guitar intro at the beginning. So let me just dial up the sound. So I was just looking around at how this was recorded, and I'm familiar with Joe Messina, was one of the other guitar players in the group, the Funk Brothers. This is, and they were the band, a session band that used to record all the tracks for the Temptations, Aretha Franklin, and all the Motown artists. To be honest. A fantastic band, and Joe Messina used the telly for all the chords in the song. One, two, three, and then over the top you got the classic guitar riff. It's a great riff, and actually that's played on a ES-175, which I don't have. But all the guitars weren't actually used plugged into an amp; they were all direct into the desk. Which I think, Yeah, it sounded. I couldn't really pick that out from listening to it, but obviously it does sound very direct. And so I've actually just plugged in my HX Stomp here. I've taken the amp off. I've actually just put a studio preamp on with an EQ just to brighten it up. And what we got on the bridge pickup here. Just sounds great, doesn't it? And it's just one of those all-time classic riffs that just, I think, stands the test of time. It, to me, doesn't seem to date or age in any way. It's just full of soul, and yeah, just that's my nomination. And if you want to kind of look more into this as well, there's a great documentary called "Standing in the Shadows of Motown," and it takes you through the whole history of Motown, how it all started, and takes you back to where these songs were recorded, which I think was in a garage of a house, so a really confined space. And this is where they spent all their time. And writing these songs, I think, was a big deal at the time. They always used to sit down around, have the stereo on, the speakers, and would listen to the song and go, I think the quote is, would you buy a sandwich or buy this song? And if everyone said, I'll buy a sandwich, then they'd throw the song out. Well, this one turned out to be worth more than a bit of bread. So, yeah. So there's my nomination.
Instantly recognizable, that riff, though, isn't it? It's, you know, as soon as you hear that riff, you just it clicks, that song.
Yeah, Phil, have you got your 335 there? Is that behind you?
It's behind me somewhere. Yeah.
I was wondering if you want to grab that and have a go at playing the riff, just because I see if you can get close to the sound.
There's so many cool sounds in that era, isn't there? Because I think the hardware that they were using in the studios was so good. Like you said, Chris, just plugging straight into the board. There's lots of tales of, you know, the Beatles and lots of bands doing that at the time. And you've got desks like the Neve stuff that was around, and it's just a different world. Like, that equipment had such a big effect on the sound, almost as much as the instruments did, didn't it?
Yeah, well, I know they all used to record in one room, I believe. So, having the guitars DI, it took out those problematic factors of the guitar amps being too loud over the drum kit, which I think only had like one mic on the kit or something, or two mics or something. It was very limited to the amount of microphones they had. So it goes to show how good of musicians they all were, because they all had to dynamically play within each other's range. And it's just a whole nother level. And I think they were like knocking out 6 songs a day, 6 hits a day or something. But yeah, as far as the Funk Brothers go, in my opinion, one of the greatest bands of all time. Just they were coming up with these songs. You know, they were coming up with these riffs, and it just,
a hit making machine. They were.
They were, man.
Machine.
Yeah. So Phil, this song is played on the bridge pickup. Tone slightly rolled off.
Yeah, I've got one.
These are from my notes. And direct into the desk. I don't know if you could just pull up a studio preamp or something and
kind
take
of
off.
direct as I've got it now. Have a listen to this. See what you think.
It's pretty close. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not far off, is it?
No.
Yeah.
Cool. It's a great riff, and that continues all the way through the song. And I love the bass in it. It's got that what's it? Let's see.
Yeah.
And all the harmonies as well, vocal harmonies as well. I think, it's just.
Oh man. Well, that's a whole different world as well. But the 60s is just so rich for music all round, isn't it? I mean, we're looking at guitar parts really, but when you get into other stuff like vocal harmonies, again, there was no auto-tune, there was none of that. So, like you said, Chris, they had to be, really shit hot musicians, but they also had to have all that side of it down as well. Otherwise, you'd ruin a take.
But everything had to be about the song. This is the thing. It's all about the song. Everything you're playing has to complement the music, and it has to complement the singers as well. You need to be out their way when they're singing, and it's all about the vocal harmonies at this time, isn't it?
Sorry, yeah.
Definitely.
What's that you've got there, Phil?
It's another bottle. It's a bottle of port.
Please tell me it's number 2.
Well, kind of, yeah. I opened it just before we started because the last bottle only filled the glass up. So I had to open a new bottle. Yeah.
It's to help him get over the fact that he's missing hedgehogs on TV.
Oh, you just reminded me I was getting into this podcast. Oh, no.
Oh, dear.
Now my mind's just going to be on beaver all the rest of it. You're listening to the Guitar Heroes podcast.
I guess it's my turn, and it wouldn't really seem fit if we didn't feature this guy. So, see if you know this one. I'm going to play 2 notes.
I knew you were going to do Hank Marvin as well.
Of course, where would we be without the big man himself, Jimi
Bernie
Hendrix?
Marsden.
Bernie Marsden.
So yeah, obviously, talking guitars and talking 60s, we could not mention God himself, Jimi Hendrix, and that was, of course, Purple Haze, which was his second single released in March of 1967, and it reached number 3 in the UK chart. Do you know what his first single was?
Oh,
I think I do, but I can't remember. It's not what you're expecting it to be, is it?
it's not. No.
Well, I'll give you a clue. It's not actually his song. It was a cover.
Oh, was it Hey Joe?
It was Hey Joe.
Yeah, he didn't.
So
he didn't
in,
write that, did he? No.
He didn't like it. No, in 66, his manager or whoever it was at the time urged him to put out Hey Joe. They thought it was going to be a big hit, and Jimmy did it, but he felt like it didn't really represent him. There's a quote of him saying that, yeah, that record isn't really us, and we're working on some stuff that's going to represent, where we want to take this. And Purple Haze was like the official first Jimi Hendrix experience.
I remember
original.
listening to that.
Yeah, and just to imagine what that must have sounded like in 67. But to come back to my point earlier about the Brits, and now I've got some stick for saying stuff like this online before. We did a video at Absolute once where we went into the history of the Les Paul, and I made a comment that had it not been for the British invasion, the Les Paul might have died out, because really, when you got to the mid-60s, it was gone. Gibson had discontinued it, and it was only because of Jimmy Page, Jeff Beck, and Clapton, and people like that playing that old guitar from the 50s.
I think that's a valid comment, to be honest.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Well, in the case of Jimmy, it was Chaz Chandler of the Animals that really saw him and said, hang on, this guy's onto something here, and he made his move into management. But at the time, Jimmy wasn't having much success in the States, not relative to where he eventually went. And of course, it was him moving to London and meeting with Mitch Mitchell and Noel Redding and forming the Experience. But it was really London that kind of nurtured him. So I kind of see that as, although he's an American, it's kind of a win for the home team there. Anyway, back to Purple Haze. Apparently, Chaz heard him playing that riff and said, you need to make something more of that. It wasn't originally going to be a track on the record, but it was something that he urged him to do. And apparently Jimmy finished writing it in the dressing room of a show that he was playing that evening. He just pieced it together. And the band didn't even know it until they went into the studio. Jimmy taught it to them on the day, and I think they got it in, I think it was like third take or something, and that was done. The core track, and then Jimmy and Chaz spent weeks and weeks going over, doing all the overdubs, which again, for me, is why it is such an epic track and such a pioneering track, because not only is it the introduction of Jimi Hendrix and the introduction of that whole wave of psychedelic rock that kind of followed it, but it's also pushing the boundaries in terms of technicalities, because they messed with things like speeding up the tape, slowing down the tape. You've got reverse sounds. It's the first example of the Roger Mayer Octavia, the octave that he uses in the solo. That's the first example. They even did things like they played the track back through headphones and moved it around the microphone to create kind of swirling effects before we had full stereo, control over that aspect of stereo recording. And of course, that intro itself features the devil's music. It is the diminished fifth. That sound. We wouldn't have heavy metal as we know it if if we didn't have the diminished fifth. And I can't think of an earlier example in rock music that really we had that thrown in our faces. But yeah, everything about the track, the solo, we got that. Fuzz face and everything kicking off. It's classic Jimmy, and it laid the way for what was to come with the following two albums. And at the time, to pick that up and listen to it, 1967, you must have just been like, whoa. Mind blown.
Yeah.
Mind blown.
Unlike any other rock guitar players at the time as well, he was always highlighting chord changes in the song, like you just demonstrated there, Lee. Those chords that are moving, so what we got is like a G. And he's moving up with the lead lines, following those chords. And, a lot of the time, I'm not going to knock anyone for doing it, but, they would just stick in one position on the guitar, just, playing licks that they've learned or practiced. But Jimmy was being very musical and had directions to his solos. And
well, I remember hearing that solo. It was one of those tracks that when you first start learning guitar, you really kind of get into. And I remember, I think I was buying like Kerrang magazines and they were trying to teach you how to play that. And I always remember that solo it never really made sense to me because he was using, he does all. It kind of sounds a bit weird. He's got all these weird tonalities. He's using like Mixolydians and things in there. He's got the octave on. He's got the fuzz. And it made it sound kind of otherworldly in amongst other kind of blues rock riffs and stuff. And I mean, that's now hearing it. That was when I was listening to it for the first time in the probably late 90s, 2000s. But hearing it back then in the day, like, I can't imagine what it would have been like. It was
Marmite,
so different.
I should imagine.
To be honest,
I would think it'd be like, after everything being so, it was a lot. Yeah, the swinging 60s. Yeah, there was a lot of new stuff happening in the 60s. But then for someone like a freak like Jimi Hendrix to come along and do all that, I expect it was like, this guy needs committing, or this guy is God.
But it's almost like he's almost like the Steve Vai of our day.
Yes, definitely.
Someone pushing boundaries, and I mean, we spoke about guitar icons, but Jimmy obviously being the one because he pushed boundaries and took chances, and I don't think he let outside influence affect his music. He just went with what he wanted, what he could hear in his head, and what felt good to him. And
well, there's a quote from Clapton. I think it was the first time Clapton got to see Jimmy live. Jimmy came to a gig in London that Clapton was playing. I think it was like London Polytechnic or something like that. And Jimmy asked to get up on stage and do a couple of tracks. And he did, and Clapton just said he just stood back and watched, and he saw Jimmy represent lots of different styles of music in a very short amount of time, and also throw in these tricks. He played with his teeth, he put the guitar behind his head, but he said, unlike other people who did those things in a very gimmicky, very performance kind of way, he said there seemed to be some sort of strange naturalness to Jimmy, that it came from somewhere else. And I think the famous line was, and from that day my life changed completely, or my guitar playing changed. Whatever happened that day, Clapton just couldn't look back once he'd seen Jimmy. So it must have been quite groundbreaking, because Clapton was already, a name for himself at that time.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, I purposefully...
No, Lee, that was a great nomination.
Yeah, I purposefully kept away because I thought one of you two is going to do Jimi Hendrix.
Well, I almost did, but then I thought, oh man, if we all have the same thought and nobody nominates Jimmy, this is just horrendous. We can't not do that.
I knew Lee was going to run with Hendrix, so I stayed. I would have gone with Purple Haze, because I remember listening to that when I was younger, and I listened to it on repeat. I couldn't understand what, like you said, Lee. I couldn't understand what I was listening to, and. Just the use of the Hendrix chord. I remember just playing that because it was the first kind of weird chord that I learned. You sort of went through your open chords, your bar chords and power chords, and then all of a sudden you tried to learn Purple Haze, and you're hearing. It's like, huh? Mm-hmm. And then you get into Jimmy's way of thumbing over the top of the neck, and you get all of those.
all those things that he did. It's like, whoa, man, it's just completely.
He's a unique player because you take something like Little Wing, the intro is all chordal, but it sounds like a guitar solo at the same time, and he has this magic of fusing just rhythm and lead at any given moment, and yeah, just so unique and always push boundaries. So, man, that was a great nomination, and yeah,
I've got to be honest. Over the years of the guitar show, we've done a fair few Hendrix songs, and one that's stayed in the whole time has been Little Wing, purely because it's my favourite song to play. I think I love that song.
I love that song.
It is great. It's a great point in the show as well because it brings the dynamic down for a bit, doesn't it? And it's got that ballad aspect to it. It's great fun.
Yeah,
great fun.
Well, we'll take Hendrix off the list then. There you go.
There we go. Back to you, Mr. Walker.
Back to me. Okay. Well, the people at home can't see this, but you guys can. I've got my double neck on right now. Purely because there's only one neck I'm interested in at the moment.
Okay.
And I'm just going to play a riff and see if you guys know what this is.
Okay.
Any ideas? I'm going to play another one. Hang on then.
Okay.
See if you know this.
This is all sounding very familiar, and obviously
I've got you stumped, haven't I?
You're making use of the 12-string.
You're going to go with the Beatles because they use the 12-string Rickenbacker, but
They
you don't
did,
have a
but you know
12.
what? No, it's not the Beatles because I thought one of you guys might be touching on that as well. It's actually the Searchers.
The Searchers.
Okay.
The Searchers, which obviously, the British invasion was a Merseybeat group, which was part of the British invasion. Obviously, there was Jerry Marsden, Jerry and the Pacemakers, and who actually died this week. Was it? I was last week. Sorry.
Yeah. Man, it's terrible. I love what's the song? Don't let the sun catch you crying. I remember listening. My nan used to listen to that when I was a kid, and just that music is so good.
Yeah. But a big part of the '60s for me was the 12-string sound because it was a new instrument, like Chris said. The Rickenbacker, used by the Beatles. I know the Searchers used the Burns double six back then. I saw a recent video of the Searchers, which obviously there's the different incarnations of the band over the years, but I think they were using a Rickenbacker. And then there's one of my favourite guitars of all time, and I am going to own one of these, hopefully not too far in the future, which is a Fender Electric 12-string from 1966.
Awesome.
I found on a website the other day in white with the tortoise guard.
Bill, what's the website, mate?
It was it's ATB Guitars. Are you gonna order it for me for Christmas?
No, I thought it's gonna set you back a fair few quid. I would have thought.
Yeah, not as much as you'd think. Because the Fender Electric 12, I suppose they said Leo Fender was a bit late to the party when it came to 12 strings, because it had been done before. But it was basically like a Jazzmaster body. It's actually quite a unique instrument with a hockey headstock, and beautiful guitar. And it's one of the guitars on my bucket list that I'm going to own one of these days. But that's it for me really. Just invasion of the 12-string, if you like, and the Searchers
awesome.
was quite a big user of the 12-string, certainly on those two big songs. And it's just reminded me that I must get a Searchers vinyl because I was like, I haven't got one of those. I was looking through my vinyl collection, wondering who to do for this podcast. And I was thinking of the Searchers, and I haven't actually got one, so I'm going to have to go and hunt some Searchers vinyl now, I think.
Love it. Right. Okay.
I'm gonna follow suit. I'm gonna carry on with this 12-string theme.
Okay.
And I'm gonna dive into the Beatles.
I'm
only gonna go with one song, obviously. Leaves some more open for you, Lee, if you've chosen one. But this song released on the 9th of April, 1965. Unfortunately, I don't have a 12-string, and I can't even load a 12-string block on my HX Stomp because I've run out of DSP.
Oh no!
They've obviously brought in
trouble with digital gear.
They brought in the 8 blocks, but unfortunately, I'm using up 6. But you have to. There is a bit of play there if you wanted to bring in something that's quite powerful, you have to sacrifice a few other things. But maybe Phil could probably reiterate what I'm about to play. But this song is called "Ticket to Ride." And I've always loved this song. There's a few moments in it which I'll try and pull on. Obviously, the intro is a big classic. Let's see.
Oh, nice.
So that was played on a Rickenbacker 12-string for a Vox. So yeah, unfortunately I can't get the 12-string, but that's how the riff goes, and it's so simple. It's just based around an open A major chord. Third finger's released for that open B string, and it just gives you a bit of chime there. I think the 12-string gives you a ton of chime on that riff.
It's an awesome sound. 12-string.
Something like that, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's the... Yeah.
That's it. It's just open. Yeah. But yeah, that
Nice.
sounds spot on, Phil. And it's for me such a great riff, and there's also, they were musically pushing boundaries as well as the multi-tracking, and in the middle of the song, trying to think how to get there. That's it. She's gonna here we go. Ride. We hit a G major 7 chord. The Beatles using jazz. Come on, Phil, it's cool.
I don't really class an A major 7th as jazz, to be fair.
No. Needs a few ninths and 13th thrown in there, doesn't it?
But check this out. It's played like this. And here we're playing like let me see what this is. G major 7 sharp 13.
We've drifted into Chris's corner here.
There we go. But also coming out the middle section,
Nice.
we got the that's it. I don't know why I'm riding so high. I don't know. That little lick there for me is absolute classic. Yeah.
Awesome.
But yeah, that song for me had so many cool elements. I just really enjoy it, and there's so many to choose from, but that one for me just stands out the most.
The Beatles were on my list as well. Again, there's just too many songs to choose from. Too many good examples of great guitar. One for me was always I probably got the wrong sound on for this, but just that chord at the beginning.
There's an
Hard Day's
interesting
Night. So good.
But do you know that was actually 3 chords played at once?
Oh, was it?
We should have prepared that for today. That would have been, one is just a basic G. One plays like there's one does this like F open chord, and there's like a D sus4 played.
Okay.
One has to play a D sus4. Let's see if we can all record this at the same time.
It's going to be hideous.
You're going to have to sync this up, Lee, but we'll have to shout for. And one does a D. I'll do the D sus4.
I'll just do the power chords because I've got a thicker sound on here.
And then one is just a basic G.
Okay.
I think. And just see how that's. Or one is something like this. Okay, let's just shout. 1, 2, 3, 4.
That sounds awful.
I'll leave you to sync that up. See if you
Yeah,
can.
the Beatles have got nothing on us.
We'll see if you can sync that up, Lee.
But also, you've got. Man. Anyway, that's not my
What's that
nomination.
other one as well by the Beatles. Hang on.
Here we go.
I'm in love with her and it's all right. What's the
yeah.
I'm in love with her and I feel fine.
They had some
Is it?
amazing riffs, didn't they?
I
They
like
really did.
what's the
Yeah.
Here Comes the Sun. Yeah. What about doon, doon, doodly doon, doon.
Come Together? That was a 60s number. Yeah.
Whatever it is.
Oh,
yeah,
isn't it?
Man. I did that.
Oh, Lee's already played that one.
Oh, yeah.
But also, this is I think George Harrison was such an underrated guitar player. Never really got the light that he deserved. And you take something like "I Saw Her Standing There," that.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's specifically played here as well to get that nice brightness and.
I think we need to do a Beatles podcast, don't we? Clearly.
Let's do it. I'd really, I'd be in my element there, man. That'd be...
All right. So, Chris, cracking nomination. We couldn't talk about 60s music without mentioning the Beatles. So there we go. So I guess it's back to me, and along the same lines, really. How could we talk about 60s music without going? Who is it?
That's Beatles.
It's a Whitesnake, isn't it?
I was torn. I really wanted to do this one. But I didn't want to embarrass myself by having to sing the drums.
Oh, go on.
But you did anyway. You just did it.
I did. It is, of course, the mighty Led Zeppelin. And that was Whole Lot of Love from 1969 and Good Times, Bad Times also from 1969. Now, there is the fact that I think is not discussed enough. Led Zeppelin 1 and Led Zeppelin 2 both released in the same year. And if you look at the tracks that are on those two albums, you've literally got classic after classic. And just to get that, I mean, think about that. How many artists these days release 2 albums in 1 year? Yeah. And they be as groundbreaking as Zepp 1 and 2. It's crazy. And obviously you've got so many things being kind of pioneered there. You've got not just the guitar, but you've got Bonham, you've got the vocals, you've got the production technique, you've got Jimmy Page producing it. There were so many things happening at once that I almost feel like at the time it probably would have been just too much to take in.
It also cements your comment about a Brit bringing the Les Paul back, doesn't it?
There you go. Perfect, Jimmy Page. It's weird to think that the Les Paul could have literally been lost to the history books because it was discontinued. It was gone. Those guys were playing guitars that were at that point 10 years old. I mean, Jimmy Page recorded Whole Lot of Love with a 58 Les Paul when he recorded it in 69, and that was a discontinued guitar. It came back in 69, probably because of Led Zeppelin and Clapton and so on. So Whole Lot of Love was the second Zepp single, although not in the UK, because interestingly they didn't release singles in the UK. The UK market had largely moved away from singles and moved to albums, and they weren't getting the recognition that they felt they deserved, and the songs being a little bit longer. You think about Whole Lot of Love, and it's got that whole free-form breakdown section in the middle. That wasn't widely accepted by UK radio stations. So it was only the second single, but you could look at that first album and say that, well, there's probably like 5 or 6 singles there by today's standards. And these days, Radio 2, in a vote they did with their listeners, it was voted greatest guitar riff of all time. And of course, famously used as well as the intro to Top of the Pops for many years. You heard that. And a deceptively tricky little riff to play. I mean, really, by today's standards in terms of technicalities, you might overlook it. But the key for me is that bend. So he's hitting 2 strings at once. He's hitting the D note on the A string and the open D, and bending the D on the A string slightly sharp. So you get... Which you could argue maybe wasn't intentional, but that's kind of where that sound comes from. It wasn't a double track thing.
There's probably a lot of things that weren't intentional that have ended up being
yes,
made history.
I just think that era for Zeppelin, if you look at their history, obviously coming out of the Yardbirds, so Jimmy Page was already a well-established session player and already part of the Yardbirds at that time, which had also, Clapton had been part of, Jeff Beck, and when the Yardbirds kind of broke down, he needed other people to continue a tour that they had. So he found other musicians, which essentially became Led Zeppelin. He recruited John Paul Jones, and I think Robert Plant came next, and then Plant recruited Bonham, and they became the New Yardbirds and went on tour and actually demoed some early Zepp material on that tour before rebranding and becoming Led Zeppelin. But the first recording was entirely funded by Jimmy Page and their manager at the time. They had no label, they had nothing. It was just Jimmy Page and the vision that he had. They went into the studio, and I think they paid something like 1,200 quid for that first album, which by today's standards was something like 30 grand. So you imagine stumping up 30 grand of your own money with a new band that you've just formed, and just knowing that it was going to take off. And it did. But interestingly, coming back to Whole Lot of Love, have you guys heard You Need Love by Muddy Waters?
No.
Or have you heard You Need Loving by the Small Faces? Because if you haven't, you need to check this out. It is basically bang on the vocal that Robert Plant sang.
Oh.
You hear it, and the lyrics are like 80% the same, and obviously it came 3 years before Whole Lot of Love, and it actually went to court years later, and it kind of went in favour of the Small Faces, and they settled out of court for an undisclosed sum, because Robert Plant essentially admitted that Jimmy Page was the driving force behind that song. He had the riff, that was entirely his, and we were thrown into the studio, and I needed something to sing, and I didn't have a clue what to do. And he'd attended a Small Faces concert and remembered that song and really liked it. Basically just ripped it off. When you hear it, go check it out. And if listeners as well, if you've not heard it, go first to Muddy Waters' You Need Love from 1963, because that's the original version. And then the Small Faces did their own version of that, their own take on that, called You Need Loving, and that was 1966. And if you know a Whole Lot of Love, not the riff, but the vocal part is it's uncanny, which I didn't know. I only found that out in my research. So there we go. It wouldn't be a discussion about 60s music without Led Zeppelin.
No. I know. Should we go around again? Should we have a speed round?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I'm up for
Just
that.
because obviously there are a few artists that need to be mentioned, I think, and hopefully maybe we in the next round we get to cover them.
Okay.
I've got 2 nominations here. One is the band The Tornadoes, famous for that tune Telstar, which the Shadows covered as well. And they're still going. They actually, I don't know how many of the original members are left, but they do still go around. I know that. And not a band as such, but I would just want to nominate this guy because he's probably overlooked as one of the best rhythm guitar players ever, I think, and that is Bruce Welch from the Shadows. That guy is an amazing guitar player. Like I say, overlooked. People always go, "Oh, Hank Marvin," but Bruce Welch needs some big thumbs up because he's an incredible rhythm player. So that's my 2 speed round. Over to you.
Interesting point about the Tornadoes, first British band to have a US #1 single.
Ah, that's good.
There you go. That was the first British single to go to #1 in the States. Sorry. Chris.
Okay, well, I'm going to run with The Who. This one is, I've got 2 actually from The Who, if I may. The first one being I Can't Explain from 1965. You know, just absolute classic sounds. And the next one being from 1969, which I think, a bit like Led Zeppelin with those 2 albums, kind of took them into the 70s and created a new era of rock, I think. And this song being Pinball Wizard. I don't have an acoustic, but that... just that intro. And obviously that came from the rock opera Tommy, which is, more of like, you're talking about moving away from singles and going into albums. There's the Who's take, and Pete Townsend for me is a massive idol, and there's my nomination.
Well done. Very good.
Awesome. Okay, well, I've got a massive list of notable mentions, so I'll just cram them in. Talking of The Who as well, what about... My generation.
She's got a ticket to ride. Oh, sorry.
Talking about my. I mean, what a tune! Just the breakdown section where they all take solos. You've got Keith Moon. Oh man,
And John Entwistle on the bass on that song. He's the driving force as well behind that song.
I learned that the hard way when we did Won't Get Fooled Again. I was like, yeah, I'll be up for that, playing bass. I was like, lying underneath the surface of that song, Entwistle's playing. Oh, man. There's harmonics flying. There's like, it's just crazy stuff.
What was his nickname? Was it Thunderfingers or something?
Yeah, he what a monster and what a unique sound.
Or incidentally, just a quickie, if anybody's interested, he's got a book, sadly he's passed, but he's got a book out called Bass Culture, and it's got all his guitar collection in there. Amazing book, if anybody wants to get that.
Awesome. Yeah. I need to check that out. Okay, what about this one?
Dick Dale.
There you go.
Yeah.
Mizzaloo, 1962. Coming out of the surf scene, but man, what a guitar tone. What a guitar tone. Amazing. All right, 1966. How about this one?
I left off Clapton. Cream because I thought one of you guys would have done it.
That's exactly. I thought Lee was going to run with it, and he did.
Sorry, there's just so much to cram in here. There's just so much good stuff.
Oh, man.
And look, I looked into this as well, right? Rolling Stone magazine, top 500 songs of all time. Okay, so of all time. They go back to the 1940s. 1960s wins it by a clear mile. You've got, of the 500 songs, 196 coming out of the 60s. So that's 39.2% of the vote. 70s follows with 131, and the 50s in third with 68. But yeah, 1960s winning by a clear mile. And also, interestingly, both number 1 and 2 on that list are from the 60s. I don't know whether it's anything to do with the fact they both mention the word Rolling Stone, but Rolling Stone voted Bob Dylan's Like a Rolling Stone as number 1 and the Rolling Stones' Satisfaction as number 2. And for my final nomination, and it's a bit of a curveball, I need to pick up my acoustic, so just talk amongst yourselves.
I could be watching Badgers right now. Are you a naturist? Oh no, that's not right.
Actually,
naturalist. No,
I'm a naturist. I don't know.
What's the one?
I'm a big fan of big cats. I like lions and tigers and cheetahs. And
yeah.
I could watch them all day.
I've got a little cat.
I know.
Yeah, she's like a normal cat, but a little bit smaller. She's really tiny. Oh dear.
Yeah, she's lovely. But yeah, anything David Attenborough as well, man. I love all that stuff. It's just it's so interesting. And
in it.
I'm back.
Oh, never mind. We don't care. We're talking about cats.
we're talking about wildlife now, mate.
Can you hear this? Does this work?
Yep.
I can hear your headphone cable on the strings. That's a great effect.
Sorry.
You know.
It's not very professional, is it? Sorry, folks. Let's see. Okay, so another big movement that was rising in the 60s was the whole folk scene. And I think we should acknowledge that there was a lot of good guitar playing that came out of that. And for me, it was this. See if I can play it. Does anybody know what that is?
I was going to run with Joni Mitchell.
No? I did say it was a bit of a curveball.
I haven't a bloody clue.
No idea. Some of those chords are interesting. I'm trying to think who would use some of those.
No? Okay, so, curveball, that was Nick Drake.
Nick Drake.
And Riverman, which for me is probably the most personal of all the tracks because it's one of those albums. It's from his first album, 5 Leaves Left, and it was recorded in 1969. An absolutely incredible album if you're into acoustic kind of English folk. But the undertones of particularly that song, I think, were massively influential for a lot of rock music to come, because that is in 5/4. He uses open tunings all over the album, and that shift, so you've got ninth chords there, that shift that just subtly, you hear that kind of thing coupled with the odd time signature in a lot of prog music that followed, and a lot of kind of weird proggy metal and stuff like that. And this was like an English folk guy. He was a reluctant performer. There's no video of him. He didn't have much success at all while he was alive. He died very young, tragically, of suspected overdose, but it could have been an accident, one of those things that we'll never know. But his music went on to just have a real cult following, and if you get into it, it's hard to not kind of fall in love with it. So I would definitely recommend, particularly if you're into vinyl, try and get hold of a copy of 5 Leaves Left by Nick Drake from 1969 and immerse yourself in some amazing acoustic playing.
Is this why we haven't been able to get hold of you, Lee?
This is what I do in my spare time. No, actually, it is exactly that. That's an album that when I'm on my own, I really enjoy listening to that sort of stuff, and I do a lot of running, a lot of cycling, and spend a lot of time on my own. And kind of when you're out there doing that stuff, that's the sort of music that I normally gravitate towards, because it's, I don't know, something very soothing in a weird, mysterious way about it. But
makes you ponder, upon self-reflection and stuff. It takes you into that frame of mind, I suppose. And
definitely, and there are hidden gems there, and there are hidden works of genius, particularly when it comes to guitar playing. There's lots of stuff online that said that Nick would obsess over his guitar playing, but you wouldn't think he was like, you're never going to see him showing up on a list of guitar heroes. But some of that stuff is, for me, harder to play than some of the Hendrix stuff.
Just saying this, you got A major 9, A minor 9, obviously in a different key to me. What's your tuning, by the way? Because it sounds
well, he
lovely.
played virtually every song in a different open tuning. He would just make his own stuff up, so all his chords don't make any sense in a conventional way. But that song is actually in standard tuning, but he kind of treats it like an open tuning and hits things that you wouldn't normally hit. So it's an A add 9, but he hits the E all the time, and then you throw in the 5/4, so you get this. And then he starts singing over the top of it. It's like, huh? Genius. So that would be my curveball, a personal nomination that maybe some of you haven't heard, but if you check it out, I guarantee you'll love it.
Sounds to me like the mushrooms I've got in my fridge are the type that's going to get me into this music.
Well, there we go. What a nice note to end on. Phil's desperate to get back to his hedgehogs, you can see.
No, I'll watch it on catch-up now. Won't be the same, but... yeah.
Well, I enjoyed that,
yeah,
as I think you can probably tell.
Yeah,
I really enjoyed that.
I think I found it really interesting that we're still kind of finding our feet a little bit with this, and we're all like thinking, "Oh, I better not do that because Lee might do that one, or Chris might do this one," and that.
Yeah,
that's really funny.
It's good fun though, isn't it? I think the 50s one that we did was one of the episodes I enjoyed the most, and this one was great. Not only the recording of it, but just going down memory lane. Well, not memory lane because I wasn't alive then, but doing the research.
No, exactly. You have to apply yourself, because you got to learn. You'd learn a lot from doing this. I've learned so much from this already, from just doing these 2 decades, stuff I'd never even realized, and obviously I'm learning on this podcast as we go as well. So it's great. I'm really enjoying this. And what we got next time in a few weeks will be the 70s, won't it?
Yes, yeah, we're going to come to the 70s in a maybe a month or so. We'll come back to this format and work our way through 70s, 80s, 90s. But next week, Chris, you're in the hot seat. So what have you got in store for us?
Well, I was hoping to start a new series and involve a little bit more playing. I know we talk a lot, but I want to touch upon our favorite guitar solos, our favorite guitar intros, whether that's electric or acoustic. And I want to start reading these off. There's a few that I would like to play, and also there's some I really love, which I'm going to have to learn as well, because I want you guys to play these as well and get the tone and talk us through how you get the sounds,
okay,
and stuff like that. I think will be really interesting.
That sounds cool. I'm up for that. Sounds good. All right, then. Let's give some socials. If you want to get in touch, you can find us on Instagram. Just search for Phil Walker Guitar, Lee Troy Guitar, and Chris Anthony Guitar. If you want to find us on Facebook, it's Phil Walker Guitarist, Chris Anthony Guitar, and Lee Williams Guitarist. Or you can search for The Guitar Show. It's The Story of Guitar Heroes on Instagram and Facebook. You can head to the website, www.storyofguitarheroes, or you can head to YouTube and search Phil Walker Guitarist. I think that about wraps up 60s week.
It's indeed. Well, it's been a pleasure.
So until next time, see you soon.
See you later.
Take care, guys. Small consolation, a bottle of port. I'm missing my winter watch. Could be sat there now in the living room watching badgers and beavers.